Welcome to Moments in Time with Lucien Byfield. This time, let's take a look back at a truly wonderful era in Formula One, when the Japanese Grand Prix returned to the calendar in 1987 at the Suzuka track. November the 1st, 1987, the Japanese Grand Prix returns to the calendar after a 10-year absence, with the previous race having been held at the Fuji circuit in 1977, where we saw James Hunt winning in a McLaren, notably for the last time in his Formula One career. But this was a new era for the Japanese, at the Honda-owned circuit of Suzuka, a classic figure-8 layout intended to herald and showcase the truly dominant Honda-powered cars of Williams and Lotus, with Mansell, Piquet, Senna and Nakajima doing the honours in front of a rabid Japanese crowd. Possibly the Japanese place second to only the Italian Tifosi in passion and devotion to Formula One racing, but they were to be given a cloud with a silver lining for a result this particular weekend. Let me backtrack to paint a picture, for this 1987 Japanese Grand Prix was very significant in many ways. John Barnard and Ron Dennis had successfully rebuilt the languishing midfield McLaren team from 1981, and by the mid-80s were the team to beat, successfully taking 3 titles in a row for Lauda and Prost using a tag Porsche engine. Williams, having won the 80 and 82 titles, were to do the donkey work for the Honda engines in the mid-80s, with little success to start with, while McLaren were cleaning up. So, what about Ferrari? Well, they were early into what would be a 20-year title losing streak, despite brief flashes of glory in the early 80s, fading to also-rans by the end of 1985. Surprisingly, after Michele Alboreto took his, and at the time, Ferrari's last win at the 1985 German Grand Prix. And, at the time, Alboreto was actually in the hunt for the title. Timely? Coincidental? Call it what you will, but just as Ferrari faltered, the Williams Honda package became the hottest property in Formula One, despite McLaren milking every last bit out of their initially dominant package to luckily win the 1986 title over a squabbling Piquet and Mansell in the vastly superior Anglo-Japanese combo. Williams should have taken both titles easily in 1986, but in 1987 it was a foregone conclusion early on, as McLaren were at the end of their incredible Barnard tag Porsche era. Not only was John Barnard out the door, his choice, having had enough of Ron Dennis, and off to Ferrari, McLaren were to take the dominant Honda engines away from Williams for 1988 because Frank refused to hire a Japanese driver. So, the Formula One circus came to Japan in 1987, with Williams expected to walk it, possibly wrapping up the title for Piquet, who had the points advantage over Mansell. Ferrari had not won in 38 races, despite a massive upturn in form, in part due to the amazing skills of John Barnard. And as for McLaren, they were still strong, but in 1987 were very hit and miss. On paper, Honda had this race in the bag. With Williams the hot favourites, Mansell duly took himself out of title contention with a massive crash early on in the weekend, severely injuring his back, ending his season 2 races early. So, Honda won their first Formula One driver's title at home on a Honda-owned track, but it was very bittersweet, though Piquet certainly didn't care how he won it. Now, given Honda's dominance, Piquet was actually to retire in the race, so the Japanese fans had to cheer on Senna and Nakajima in the Honda-powered Lotuses. Nakajima would finish 6th, and at the time, the final points-paying position. Senna would finish 2nd. With John Barnard at the helm, and new signing for 1987, Gerhard Berger at the wheel, Ferrari were almost back to winning ways, narrowly missing out on a win in the Portuguese Grand Prix. With Williams Honda tripping over themselves one way or another, and Prost getting a puncture on lap 1, taking him out of race contention, it was Berger dominating from pole position to take Ferrari's first win in over 2 years, and his second career win after a year. This race for me reveals so much about a time in the history of the sport that saw the end, the beginning, and the transitioning of drivers, engines, teams, manufacturers, and designers. Think about it. McLaren were on the decline, Williams were the top of the pile, Ferrari were finally back, and in the space of 2 races it would all change again. For though Ferrari would remain and later become very strong under Barnard's leadership, it was McLaren who would take the Honda engine to even greater heights the following year, while the Williams team, who had brought Honda to title success, would be relegated to midfield no-hopers with a Judd engine. Honda may have choked in '87 at home, but would win the title and the race with Senna in 1988, in what is still statistically the most dominant era for a team in the history of Formula One, with McLaren winning 15 out of 16 races in '88. They were not to win the race in '89, although Senna fans will tell you they did, after the controversial coming together of Prost and Senna, with Senna rejoining but being disqualified. However, it was 3 drivers' titles sealed in a row for the Honda engine at home in Suzuka, and more was to follow. I will not labour on the 1990 race. There really is nothing to say other than Senna used his car as a weapon, risking the lives of over 20 drivers and countless spectators to prove a point, taking his rival Prost out in a brutal fashion. So, 4 titles in a row at home for Honda, but 3 of those 4 had been in very unsatisfactory circumstances. So to 1991, Williams again were becoming a dominant force with the Renault engine, but came good a little too late, as McLaren again milked the most out of their package in much the same way they did in 1986. Senna would win the title again on home soil, but humiliating Gerhard Berger on the last lap by blatantly moving over to let him win. Berger had been relegated to number 2 status in his 2 years at McLaren, despite starting on pole in the first outing as teammate to Senna in 1990. He had not won a race for McLaren until this 91 Japanese Grand Prix. He would have his revenge though, being the final driver to win for the McLaren-Honda alliance in 1992 in Australia. But back to the 91 race, this was to be the last of 5 straight Honda titles won on home soil, a truly remarkable achievement. A McLaren Honda 1-2 was the ultimate that Honda and the Japanese crowd could have wished for, and it really was the end of an era. Japan has luckily hosted many a title decider. Think of Damon Hill finally wrapping up the title he should have sealed in Monza '96, and Michael Schumacher ending Ferrari's 20-year title drought in 2000. And it wouldn't be the only title decider for him in Japan. Shui was to win and lose titles in Japan in a strange mix of brilliance and almost comical humour. In 1998, Mika Hakkinen was to win the race and the title for McLaren Mercedes, with Michael unbelievably stalling on the grid, thus having to start from the rear and then retiring with a puncture mid-race. Hakkinen again won in '99, with Schumacher not really helping teammate Irvine in his one and only shot at fortuitous glory. You cannot blame Michael, having had to miss a number of races due to a broken leg, only to watch Irvine mount a title challenge he probably didn't really deserve. But the next 5 years belonged to Michael, title-wise, and he would win in Japan a staggering 4 times in that period of Ferrari domination. Damon Hill has to be remembered for his amazing 3-year stretch in the Japanese Grand Prix from '94 to '96. Beating Schumacher to take the title fight to the last round in '94, Hill, driving like a man possessed in a 2-part aggregate race, was to claim years later to having had experienced a very Senna-like Zen zone where he was looking at himself driving from outside of the car. He had actually whispered a prayer to Ayrton too, knowing how good Ayrton was at Suzuka and in the rain. Now, hocus pocus, nonsense, call it what you will, but whatever Hill was on that day, he certainly wasn't the same driver in '95 in a race that must only be described as pathetic. But in 1996, after failing to wrap up the title a little earlier in the season, Hill was to drive a faultless race from start to finish to claim his one and only World Championship title. Japan has hosted the Grand Prix at Fuji and Suzuka, but the Aida track has also hosted the European Grand Prix in '94 and '95. Notable races for Fuji were of course the inaugural race in torrential rain that saw James Hunt win the title while Niki Lauda pulled out due to safety issues. Somehow, people forget Mario Andretti actually won the race. Sadly, in 1977, a photographer and a marshal were killed in a crash between Gilles Villeneuve and Ronnie Peterson. Most of the Japanese Grand Prix have been held at Suzuka, but the 2007 race saw rookie Lewis Hamilton drive like a god, while double world champion teammate Alonso would crash out in torrential rain. Hamilton got in a bit of hot water slowing behind the safety car, which in turn caught out a very young rookie Sebastian Vettel. Now check out the irony of this story. Mark Webber was in his first year at Red Bull, though not a strong team at the time. Due to conditions, he found himself second before the safety car was to pull in. Having vomited in his helmet earlier in the race and nearly pulling out, Webber was in with a shot of his first career win, and Vettel at Toro Rosso was third. Remarkable. Now, given how the future would turn out for both of them, it was interesting to say the least that it was Vettel not paying attention who, under a safety car, would run into the back of Mark Webber, taking them both out. Now, Webber was furious at the time and would mutter something about children with no experience should not be allowed in Formula One, and Vettel was seen in the pits sobbing like a baby. That race would see Felipe Massa, not known for his great wet weather driving skills, and Robert Kubica 1.0 see out the race in a duel reminiscent of France 79 between Villeneuve and Arnoux. Look this one up. Alonso might have blown his chance in 2007, but he was to win the race in 2008, proving that Crashgate at Singapore was not just down to cheating, the Renault was really back, briefly. From extreme heat to typhoons, halting qualifying sessions and interfering with races, Japan has had it all. It is a favourite amongst drivers and fans alike, and usually, if not always, produces a good race, though is always visually spectacular, and has left us with Formula One history that cannot be forgotten. Think of Kimi Raikkonen's last win for McLaren in 2005, taking the lead from Fisichella into turn 1 on the last lap. Think of Alan McNish's career-ending 130R crash in the Toyota in 2002, or Senna screaming in his helmet when he won the title in 1988. And, of course, the two crashes between Senna and Prost in 89 and 90, the latter giving Alessandro Nannini his one and only Formula One victory. Oh, and with Senna in mind, 93 saw the arrival of Irv the Swerve, Eddie Irvine, who had the audacity to unlap himself in the Jordan, infuriating Senna so much that he punched Eddie after the race. You cannot ask for much more from a track. Great racing, many title deciders, passionate fans, and even a couple of historical Japanese results, with Aguri Suzuki making the podium in 1990 and Kamui Kobayashi doing the same in 2012. Who can forget his drive in 2009 on debut? We thought we finally had a Japanese world champion in the making. Ironically, he was out of Formula One just after securing his first ever career podium. And what about Takuma Sato, everybody's favourite Japanese driver? He always fared well at Suzuka, as did Satoru Nakajima. Let us not forget the 2014 life-ending crash for Jules Bianchi. He was to lose traction in the wet and career off into a standing tractor crane. He is still talked about in reverential tones to this day, having been highly rated, liked and pretty much guaranteed a Ferrari career. Finally, in recent years, Suzuka has belonged to Mercedes, like the majority of circuits in the hybrid era, but it wasn't that long ago that Red Bull dominated here with Sebastian Vettel, and not long before that, it was a Ferrari favoured track. With recent Ferrari form and upgrades for Red Bull, it is impossible to predict who will win this time. My money is on Hamilton. He is always there or thereabouts. Well, that's it for Moments in Time with Lucy and Byfield. Catch you later.